Well, hey there, friends. Welcome into another episode of the StoryWorld Podcast. If you could only see what happened just before we hit record, you would probably never watch our show, ever.
Either that or, yeah, he would never watch our show again.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. As foolish as Steve and I are while the camera is rolling, we are more foolish away from the camera, which is really saying something.
At
We
least
really,
twice. At
we
least
really
twice
outdo
the
ourselves.
foolish.
Yeah,
So
we up it. So,
yeah,
anyway, we limited it on purpose.
yes. So in this episode, I'm really excited because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics slash people in the world. And this is actually kind of a tribute episode to a scholar and theologian who has meant a lot to me over the past few years, and has also meant a lot to Alex as well. And his name is Dr. Michael Heiser. He actually went home to be with the Lord a couple months ago now, after quite a lengthy battle with pancreatic cancer. And this is a little late. Everybody was doing their tribute episodes, a couple months ago, but I think now is a good time. The dust has settled a little bit, and I think what Dr. Heiser contributed to the world of Bible scholarship, but not just Bible scholarship. This is important for this audience because of the storytelling aspects of what we're going to get into, and so it's we'll get into all of that, but I just wanted to kind of lay that introduction out there for you.
That's a good introduction. I think just kind of saying again what you stated, but Steve is much more familiar with Heiser's work than I am. I have read one of his books, then also listened to quite a few of his podcasts, but I'm definitely just getting into the weeds with him. But as Steve said, definitely from what what little I have read through his material, listened to him, he's definitely had a huge influence on how I see things and just my perspective on the Bible and stories there in general. So looking forward to kind of talking about him, and I think we're going to go through maybe our coming together place of when we first heard about Michael and what kind of drew us into him.
Yeah. So for me, and I guess maybe we should set the stage a little bit with what even he. Well, we'll just do it this way. We'll let you discover it. We'll build a little bit of tension as we go. So
Structural tension.
A little bit of structural tension. For some reason, I feel like that's just going to be an inside joke from now on. I don't know why, but
it will be.
Here we go. Really nothing too spectacular, but I guess a few years ago now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I started seeing just hints in like the theology and apologetics community online about this idea called the unseen realm. Okay. And I didn't know very much about it at all. I was very much on the periphery of things. And I kept hearing this idea about the unseen realm and heavenly beings. And then this name, Heiser, would pop up from time to time. And I was like, okay, like one of those things where I knew it was a big deal, but I also knew it was going to be a rabbit hole, right? And so I sort of I avoided it intentionally and just didn't get wrapped up in it because I knew that once I did, I would just be like in that world for a while. Turns out I was right. But I was really trying to stay measured. And I think it was one Saturday I was, bored sitting on the couch and scrolling through YouTube, and a lecture of his came up that was given at a church, and it was like a 4-part series. And I was like, you know what? This looks really long, but I've got plenty of time to kill. It's a Saturday. I watch things on double speed anyway. So
if only there were a triple speed, right, Steve?
Bro, anytime there is, I listen. I take that opportunity. So YouTube, unfortunately, is only on double speed. I can handle 2.5. So YouTube, if you're listening, let's do this thing. Come on. And so I was like, all right, let's give it a shot. Let's just see. I got time to get caught in a little bit of a rabbit hole today. And as I listened through that lecture, oh man, for me, my first sense after encountering the material that Dr. Heiser was presenting other than, frankly, I mean, because he set things up well. I mean, he's been talking about this stuff for a while, and so he really took his time, you know, setting it up for the audience, the kind of journey that he was about to take you down, and so it was a measured approach. But for me, the first sense really that I got from it was, wow, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense, because what he did, the way that he presented it, um, made things that we all already knew were in the Bible, but didn't really, like, make sense, but yet we've heard it our whole lives, so we just kinda, like, put that over there in the little dusty corner of things that we don't touch because, yeah, it's in there even though we don't understand it. All of those things started to make sense with the whole cohesive narrative storyline of the Bible, and then from there, I was just frankly hooked. I read his book, The Unseen Realm. I read his book, called Supernatural, which is like a more practical, lay-friendly introduction to his book, The Unseen Realm. And, if I were just to sort of summarize very briefly, not even yet what he teaches, but more so just, like, how he teaches,
Mm.
his whole kinda thing after binging 300 plus episodes of the Naked Bible podcast and then reading his books multiple times now, the interesting thing is that, he it's not as though he had very many original thoughts. He was a scholar who could understand the scholarly literature and was really great at synthesizing what scholars were saying, in a way that made sense for a lay audience. And not only that, but like what people might not really even know about him or think right off is that he's actually a pretty darn conservative Christian, right? Some of his ideas are the kind of things that, like, sometimes a liberal scholar might take and just go totally off the rails with, but not Mike. Mike was like, "Look, let's think about this logically. We're still conservative Christians here, and we wanna take the Bible seriously and all of that, but yet these ideas seem to be well evident, so how does that all work together?" And in my estimation, there was just nobody who could do that quite like Mike, and so I think that's that particular piece of being able to bring the scholarly literature out in such a way that made sense while also just honoring, you know, um, Christianity, honestly, while honoring the inspiration of the Bible, the authority of the Bible, and things of that nature. I think he did that exceptionally well. So that's sort of how I encountered him and kind of my first initial thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of people have a similar coming to Heiser story. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
you almost have to be in a similar mindset. So I guess before I kind of get into my brief little story, I I can there are probably I would say the majority of people out there can go through life reading their Bible, studying the scriptures, going to church, doing everything, and not have a need or urge or desire to hear anything that Heiser has to say, just because it's just not in them. But I kind of think about sitting like in church growing up and having like the pastor read through a portion of scripture or hearing about it in Bible class, and things just kind of get skipped over, and they always get skipped over. Things that come to mind are like the sons of God and daughters of men in Genesis, and then
Mhm.
you have the council of gods in Psalm, and so there's some really weird just stuff in the Bible that anytime it's read through, it's skipped over. If you're someone who's always thought that's kind of weird, like I always kind of wondered about that, then I think Heiser is a natural kind of progression. Not Heiser, like Steve said it brilliantly. He didn't make up this stuff or create this stuff on his own. He just was an excellent synthesizer for putting it all together and putting it out
Mm.
there. So my story, I've only really been into Heiser for the last year and a half or so, reading through his stuff and going through the Naked Bible podcast. I was talking to Steve, and this is when Steve and I were first just kind of becoming friends and chatting a lot about different subjects. And we got on the topic of UFOs and aliens and everything. And I had said something along the lines of, I forget where the conversation went to, but I said something along the lines of that I think it makes natural sense that we kind of wonder about aliens just because the Bible is such a supernatural book. that it just kind of makes sense that our mind is geared toward those kind of things. And immediately Steve said, "Hey, have you heard about the unseen realm and Michael Heiser?" And I think Steve knew he had hooked one there.
Yeah.
And so,
I'm looking for any excuse to
for
work
any
that into
excuse,
a
yes.
conversation.
And immediately, kind of like what Steve was saying, I didn't listen to the Naked Bible podcast or hear any of his lectures. The first thing that I digested that Heiser put out there was the unseen realm. And just immediately, it was just a breath of fresh air, just explaining things that the Bible has talked about that we look past. And honestly, I think one of the most fundamental things that I can kind of point to, again, it's something that we've all read and kind of know, but never really grasped, is the fact that humans are imagers of God. And it's not just that it's a thing that we do, but it's who we actually are. And that's kind of a fundamental truth that he kind of sets the stage for everything else that he presents. But I mean, the topics that he discusses are vast, but just some of the few that I've gone through early on in his podcast days, and Steve said they just keep getting better and better, is just simple discussions on like, what is baptism and what is it used for? Like, what is its actual purpose? The sacraments, and just talking about those subjects. And his and what he discusses ranges from the very simple to things like that, to talking about the unseen and supernatural world. And so if you kind of have a curious mind and have always wondered about that, and I think it's also very important as well, if you're even a non-Christian, I think Heiser does an excellent job for anyone to understand a little bit more depth of the Bible. I can see how a lot of people from the outside think that it's kind of some weird stories that we believe and it doesn't make sense. And it's, kind of silly to follow what it says. And I can kind of get that through a certain lens. And I think Heiser can really, if you have a logical mind and are really genuinely curious about some stuff from the Bible and why we believe what we believe and how it all works together, Heiser does a great job of presenting a very logical and clear picture of things in the Bible. Another, I think, thing that he does great is really defining and going through the genres of the Bible and how the Bible is written in certain areas. That's also been a huge, again, just something that I've always known, but just something that he really clearly breaks out to help you understand a little bit more. That's kind of been my experience.
Yeah. So, so at this point, if you're listening and you listen to now, you might be wondering, what the heck are they talking about? What does he teach? What is it? And so, I guess I'll kind of give you Mike's own origin story. So he had been at the point, he got saved a little bit later in life, grew up in church, but it was kind of a, like a sort of a weird fundamentalist sort of environment. And, 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of thing he was. And, I think he was a teenager when he got saved. And didn't really have a clear direction on what he wanted to do with his life. So, he kind of started studying the Bible after he became a Christian and really got hooked on that and decided that he would go to Bible college. And so, to fast forward, he went to Bible college. He, I believe at the point where he sort of had his, if you will, come to Jesus moment, he had, I want to say he already had 2 master's degrees, was teaching master's level courses, and was in the doctoral program. Like, he was on his way to a doctorate degree. I think when this happened, I could be a little bit wrong about that, but he was, let's just say he was sufficiently educated by the time he came across this. And so he went to a great school, and they were, he and a buddy were in either a chapel service or like a Sunday church service or something like that. One of his other, one of the people that he was in the current program with. And he was like, dude, you've got to read Psalm 82 in Hebrew. You've got to look at what I just saw. And so he goes and checks it out, and he's like, whoa, what's up with that? And basically, if you read Psalm 82, I'm just going to paraphrase, but it basically says that God sits and judges in the council of the gods, in the midst of the gods. And by the rule of Hebrew grammar, the first reference to the word God there, which in the Hebrew is the word Elohim, has to be singular, and the second one has to be plural. So it's a Elohim is a plural form. It's always a plural form, and of course it can be taken and translated singularly, just as you have it in the English language. You have a deer, or you have
Mhm.
deer. It's the same thing, right? Same kind of idea. So there's no getting around that at all. In this verse, Psalm 82:1, I think it is, literally says that God, whoever is being referred to as God there, which is very clearly the God of the Bible, sits in this council. And it's very important to understand that we're talking about Council. Okay. The council of the gods, not counsel, Counsel, where necessarily God is, because some people have tried to say, oh, well, God doesn't need to receive counsel from anybody. Well, okay, that's true. Although if he wanted to receive counsel from people, he maybe could, and there might even be some cool instances in the Bible where he kind of does that. And so you can take it up with the biblical writer, not with me. But regardless, we're talking about the council of the gods. So it is a group of heavenly beings, and once you see them in one place, my friend, and once you know the kind of language, especially that the Old Testament, but even that the New Testament uses to talk about these beings, you will literally find them everywhere. Your Bible is littered with references to other spiritual beings besides the God of the Bible, who are referred to as gods, as divine beings, as holy ones, as watchers, as sons of God, as spiritual beings, as angels. And the list goes on and on. And so most people would think about this in a very sort of terse manner. I mean, look, we're all Christians here. What I mean is anybody who is a Christian here understands the idea of angels and demons. But Alex, you could probably back me up on this. Yeah, of course. I know we live in a spiritual world. I've always known that there were such things as angels and demons because the Bible talks about angels and demons. But what typically gets covered in a angelology course or even a demonology course in college is nothing like what actually is the case, biblically speaking. And the scholarship that Heiser pointed out and the biblical work that's been done to show that that's the case. So, for example, in whenever you see the word angel, okay, in the Old Testament, it's usually the word malach, Malak, would be the sort of Hebrew transliteration of that. And that word specifically means a messenger, okay? So think about it. Anytime that you see angels, not every time, but like most of the time when you see angels mentioned in the Bible, an angel, strictly speaking, is there to deliver a message. It's a messenger. And so what we've done is we've sort of taken this one role, this one job that a heavenly being might have in a particular situation, and we've sort of latched onto that language and just called every other member of God's spiritual family one of those. And that's not the reality of the case. Another thing, you talk about demons, right? When you talk about demons, it gets even more interesting because you got to think, if you hadn't just grown up in church your whole life and heard about Jesus casting out demons, okay, if you didn't have that context, you got saved later in life, you're reading your Bible, and it's like, where did this come from? The idea of Jesus casting out demons in the New Testament, nothing like that seems to be happening in the Old Testament at all. And so, who are these demons? Where do they come from? Why are they there? Why is the Son of God casting out demons? What does that, other than the fact that it's just there and bless God, God said it, that, that settles it, I believe it and all that. Other than that, it's like, haven't you ever wondered where they come from, why they're there? And so, for example, Heiser points out that Second Temple literature, which is also referred to as intertestamental literature. So, for example, literature that would have been written in the Second Temple period of Jewish history, largely in those 400 silent years and up until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The 400 silent years that we often refer to as in between the Old and New Testaments. That time, and then up to the 70, up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that sort of encompasses the Second Temple period of Jewish literature and writing. And those authors had ideas about how demons were formed and things like that, but you wouldn't just necessarily have that context if you weren't in tune with that literature. And so to the point that Alex made, it's not as though you have to know all this in order to kind of, know the fundamentals about what you needed to know in order to go to heaven and to be a Christian and to follow God and obey his commandments and all of that. I mean, my grandmother, I promise you, wouldn't have a clue anything like what I'm talking about here. At least I don't think she would. At least not in using the same words in the same language in the way that I talk about it. But just because she didn't, I mean, my grandma also wouldn't know how to use Logos Bible software, which is this amazingly powerful tool that modern technology has, given us access to. I mean, we can do what used to take 15 to 20 years of research for a person looking up that we could literally perform one search in Logos Bible software and do that. By the way, that might be a good point to mention that lest you think this guy is just some quack or something, Dr. Mike Heiser, not only did he have a PhD in Semitic languages and a couple master degrees to boot, but he spent 15 plus years as the scholar in residence at Logos Bible software before being invited to Florida to a church to actually start his own school. So literally, and he's made this point before in a humble way, but it's also just true given his position. It's almost trivially true that there was literally no one on the planet in a more ideal position to know and to have a pulse on the breadth of scholarly literature across the board in Christianity. Because for the premier Bible software maker, he was their scholar in residence / there was another term that they used for him too, but he was basically like a senior publishing editor or something. In other words, he was literally like the filter through which all of the scholarly material came through. Not that he was filtering it out, but that like he had eyes on it and he was sort of in charge of like helping to manage that. So you talk about somebody who had the perfect amount of access to know exactly what's going on in biblical scholarship. It was this guy. And so the Lord really just had him in the perfect position to be able to make all of this content accessible to the lay reader and listener and watcher. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of additional context there. Any thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, there's a this video should come with a warning that if chances are if you're listening to this and you think, that's kind of weird, or you're saying, wow, like I really need to, this sounds something right down my alley that I really need to investigate. If you do that, just be prepared that even if you're listening to good preaching or good messages during church or Bible study, after you kind of go down this rabbit hole, there's going to be a lot that you hear that might not necessarily be wrong, but you're going to kind of shake your head and say, that's not quite right. I message Steve quite often, whether it's usually like a message I'm listening to online or in church or something, and I'll say, hey, they're talking about angels again, like in this way. I was like, I can't hear someone preach about angels without just kind of shaking my head, because it's not the correct view of them. So just be prepared that a lot of things, I think probably for the better, are just going to seem different than you, and you're going to be able to kind of weed out some funny things that you come across.
That's so true. I really underscore that point. It's so true.
It's not an exaggeration at all.
You're not going to be able to really sit through a church service again and well, you literally can't unsee it. I mean, it makes sense. This book is called The Unseen Realm, and once you see it, you can't unsee it because it's literally everywhere. And once you're looking out for it, so
that kind of goes to my next point, where, and this is something that I just kind of thought of before even getting into Heiser and everything. It goes back to the conversation that Steve and I were first having when he brought me into this. Is if you think that a lot of times, especially today, I feel like uh, we're very, very much, I guess in a way, kind of materialistic, very much focused on what we can see, feel, what we can sense. And even though we read the miracles in the Bible and we see stuff like that, we try to um, really try to kind of pigeonhole it into that one thing and try to step away from the supernatural or things that seem odd, whether it's in the Bible or what we hear by testimonies that people say. But one thing that Steve and I were talking about, and nothing new, is just that think how not just the universe that God created and God himself, but it, how he became flesh through Jesus Christ and died on the cross for our sins. And just how amazing that everything there is and how wonderful that is and how really supernatural all of that is. Yet somehow we think that that's the only supernatural thing that has ever existed, is that little point in time. And if you just kind of think for a second of how supernatural God is, it makes total logical sense that we would live in a supernatural world and universe where all of these things exist and that there's reasons and explanations for them. And so, yeah, I would just really extend an invitation to someone. What's the name of his more, I guess I would just say, kind of stripped down book that's a little bit less scholarly?
Yeah, it's called Supernatural.
Yeah, so I haven't read that one. I went right to the Unseen Realm, but Steve has said that's a great book for someone who just wants to kind of get in and just barely, touch the subject and get into it. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting that now that when I hear messages or following different devotions, studies, or hear pastors preach, just a lot of times now, I wouldn't say red flags go up, but it's just a little kind of light clicks on in my head when I hear things. And it kind of takes me back to something that I heard from Heiser, how things actually played out or how things actually are in our world.
Yeah, and it's a shame too because you see some churches are just, like, so baked in their traditions and stuff that,
Mhm.
like I mean, I'm a member of a couple Facebook groups, around this stuff, and there are people all the time who at best are told that they're not allowed to teach this in their
Mhm.
church when the opportunity arises, and at worst, I've even seen, I think 2? I think I've seen 2 cases where the members were asked to leave the church because they believed this
Wow.
and wanted to teach it. And here's the thing right? If you actually understand it, okay? If you actually understand it and you're not just afraid of new things, in my opinion, you would realize how ridiculous that is, right?
Yeah.
If one actually took the time to understand this and to even trace the history, and by the way, there are some ultra conservative people who believe this. For example, the content manager for the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum, the Answers in Genesis ministry that's over that. The ministry doesn't take an official position on this, but that guy, Tim Chapey, he's written a book about this, and his book is 500 pages long. It's insane.
Mm.
It's a fantastic book. It's called Fallen, and it describes a lot of the historical context that shows, without a doubt, that the early church believed and practiced this worldview, and it was around the 300s to 400s AD that some people started to even question any of these
Mhm.
ideas. And by the time it got to the reformers just thought it was too weird. And then of course we know that so many of our churches today are obviously based on the Protestant Reformation. And so it's definitely no surprise to me that it's fallen out of favor the way that it has. But again, like I say, if you actually just understand what's going on here, the only thing it can possibly do is help. In my opinion,
Mhm.
it's not, it doesn't, it doesn't take anything away from from everything that we learned in church,
Yep.
from the work that Christ did on the cross, from our need for a savior, from being a sinner, from the fall and the garden and Adam, Eve, all that. It doesn't take away from any of that stuff. It just adds. Honestly, though I've never thought of it this way, but I think it's true. Um, if you watch, let me ask you a question, Alex. This is
Uh-oh.
Story World, right? If you watch a black and white movie,
Mhm.
Do you know what happens in the movie?
Yes, you do see
Is it
what happens in the movie, yes.
is it enough to say, "Oh, okay, I saw what happened in the movie. I know what happened I know what happened in this movie, and I can make decisions and believe things about this movie and about my life or whatever based on it from the black and white movie."
Absolutely,
Sure.
yes.
But if you watch that same thing with color, now you see, you understand some of the little different dynamics that were going on. You comments that comments that maybe somebody referenced in the black and white movie, the red skirt that the person was wearing.
Yeah.
And you believed it because you had no reason to doubt that that person was wearing a red skirt. But when you could see the color of the red skirt for yourself,
Yep.
then the question never even entered your mind of whether or not the skirt was red. You didn't even have to think about it because you saw it before they even made the comment about it. So your eyes and your ears were on the same page.
Yeah.
I would liken this to the same kind of idea. It's like seeing the Bible in black and white. You can understand the salvation story. You can see the main characters and where they're going and all of this. You can do that without any knowledge of ancient Semitics, which if you might not even know Semitics, what that even means. The Jews were Semites. That language comes from one of Noah's sons, Shem, being sort of the ultimate, like, sort of forefather that led to that. Semites, and they, I don't even know why. I literally just blanked. Like, my mind went blank on why I was talking about Semites. Anyway, because Semitic languages. Okay, so you might not have any idea what Hebrew language and all that stuff. What any of that stuff is, you wouldn't have to know any of that if you know that you're a sinner, that Christ died for your sins according to the scriptures, and that He was raised the third day, and you can now be raised in newness of life with Him if you just believe and place your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. You shall be saved. Amen, brother. Like, welcome to the family. But it's still the black and white, in my humble opinion. It's still the black and white. And what you get, again, in my view, what you get with what Heiser brings to the table, and not just Heiser, but what the scholarship brings to the table, is just a little bit more color added. And especially when you get into, like, things, because there's things you can even get a lot more esoteric than the stuff that Heiser really even got a chance to, to teach on. For example, it's like the one of the weird phrases in the Bible. I'll just give an example that I think might help people see what I'm talking about. One of the weird phrases in the Bible happens right in the beginning of Genesis, when I think it's God talking to Cain, and he's like, Cain and Abel are having the little squabble or whatever, and Cain kills Abel, and it's like, basically, be careful, Abel, or be careful, Cain, because sin crouches at the door. And it's like, what? What does that mean? Sin crouches at the door, right? Like, that. What I don't understand. That's a weird kind of phrase, and, like, you think it means something kind of like that he might be in danger of sinning, or he might be in danger of doing something bad or whatever, and that would be a reasonable assumption, and that's fine. That's probably the black and white version of it, and people have had good guesses about that, and that's probably it. Well, when you add a little bit more color, you understand that the word being spoken there, when it says sin crouches at the door, I forget the exact word, but it starts with an R. It is an Akkadian cognate of another Hebrew word, okay? And what does that mean? Well, Akkadian is another ancient Semitic language, and so it's not Hebrew, but it's like Hebrew. And a cognate, for lack of being more complex, is basically just a shared sort of word between the two languages, where the one word is sort of able to be translated into another language or whatever. So this Akkadian cognate, and this word that was used for crouching at the door, is synonymous with the proper name in the Akkadian language for this, basically, this demon that would lie in wait, crouching down the door. Again, in ancient beliefs, they believed that there was this demon that would be crouching at the door, that would be, looking to do you harm if it caught you off guard, kind of thing. And it's like, you don't have to know that to, like, get the basic gist of what's going on with Cain and Abel. And yet, when you do know that, and that's even nerdier than, like, a lot of the stuff that Heiser talked about. But, like, And just to show you how much deeper you can get with the depth once you understand a little bit about what's going on. I like to use the phrase behind the text or beyond the text. Once you just get a little bit deeper than the surface level and see what it's saying, it just gives you a great appreciation for what God has given us in his word. That's the point.
It's kind of funny that all this may sound a little weird, just some weird topics and weird discussions, but it's kind of crazy how getting into reading about it and studying, just ancient ideas that people had and getting into all the stuff that Heiser talks about, how, yeah, it's some weird stuff that he deals with, but understanding it makes the Bible a whole lot less weird. It makes the weird make sense. And it's a really, I kind of think of it this way, aside from like the number one greatest kind of understanding and feeling that I've ever had is just recognizing that Christ died for my sins, even though he didn't have to. I'm a sinner and he died as a perfect God and man to save me. And that's kind of like the number one thing. The number two thing that really just kind of gives me a little bit of awe is just kind of making sense of all this stuff that scripture says. And so I think that's kind of, sums up my feelings on is it makes the weird stuff in the Bible less weird because it really brings it to light and adds that color to it.
Yep. That's exactly right. One final example on that kind of thing is like, have you ever wondered why the whole Old Testament basically seems to be centered around this war between Israel's God and other gods. And yet, when those other gods are referenced, they're often like said to be wood and idols of wood and idols of stone. And to make matters even weirder, land seems to have a lot to do with it. So wait a minute, you're telling me that the God of all the universe, the one who flung the stars into existence and gave you and me the breath of life, is having war with stone and wood idols over plots of land on the earth God created? What the heck are you talking about? Now, listen, what I just described to you, I just said it in a way that kind of hopefully makes you realize how stupid that would be if that was all there was to it. But that's exactly what every Christian is taught in church growing up. I mean, in most churches. I mean, is that what I just said right there, Alex? Is that a fair characterization of how you understood the Old Testament?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, especially if you grew up in the church as a kid, that's just what you hear and that's what you know, and that's what it is. And not to be rude, because I think we're all living it, but it's just ignorance because not to your fault. It's just what you've been told. Keep going.
That's right. Yep. And yet we already have a context for God being at war with something and someone. He has a name. It's a person called Satan, the devil. So we're willing to allow this idea of spiritualness, but our idea of it is so simplistic. It's too simplistic. Satan is the Lord of the dead. He is the leader of evil spiritual forces. Yes, and we could get into all that, but still, it makes a lot more sense that these gods, and this is what you find out once you dive into Heiser's stuff. I'm not going to go through it all here because we just don't have time. But what you find out is that these gods were not just wood and stone idols. No, in the logic of idolatry in the ancient Near East, the wood and stone idols were built as a way for the spiritual beings that they worship to inhabit those idols, as a way for it to interact in the physical world with the people who worshiped it. Okay. And so that's why, again, God, I hope you can see like one or two things clicking here. That's why the God of the Bible, after they leave Egypt, right, full of these gods, right? That's why God is so concerned with Israel not making any idols, because that's the way that the other people worship their gods. And Yahweh, the God of the Bible, Israel is different. And God is not to be worshipped on human terms. We're not conjuring spirits here. God is to be worshipped on his terms. And he decides when he comes. And when he comes down and his glory shines so bright, literally, if you looked on him, it would kill you. That's the way the Bible puts it, basically.
Mhm.
And so when you understand that, when you have an understanding that, no, these are actual, real spiritual beings, we're not, and again, the idea of land, Heiser refers to this as cosmic geography, okay? Because the land actually meant something. And that, again, he goes into all of that. But again, the point is, if you ever thought it was ridiculous that the God who created the universe is arguing with stone and wood idols over land, good. I think that's ridiculous too. And so did Heiser. You're going to find that his material answers a lot of questions. So maybe as we begin to wind this down here, and you're welcome to comment on anything on that you want, but I just wanted to give a couple quick places, like 2, on where to start with this. Okay. So number 1, if you are, okay, you either need to start by reading The Unseen Realm or Supernatural. And here's the thing. If you're the kind who can handle scholarly literature, you like footnotes, you wish there were more footnotes, you wish that those footnotes literally linked to a whole website that was set up to go even deeper on the topic than the footnote allowed you to go. If you're that guy or gal, then start with The Unseen Realm, okay? Because you'll be able to take from that the practical things that you need to know, because it'll just make sense to you. It'll all sort of follow. If you're not that person, if you would like a lighter read, then read his book Supernatural, because it is primarily focused on, okay, why should I even care about this stuff? I'm Johnny in the pew. It's like, I have a feeling this is important, but I don't need to know all the little scholarly nitty gritty. I just want to learn what's up. Then you should read Supernatural, because it's got all the same content as the Unseen Realm book, but it is a lot more accessible and just written in a way that's really friendly to that. Now, if you're not the reading type at all, and you're like, you know what, I really just want the high level ideas to see if this is something I really even want to explore further, then I would recommend going to the Bible Project's YouTube channel. They have a whole playlist, and I'm actually going to try to look it up here to make sure. I think it might just be called the Divine Council playlist. By the way, Dr. Mike Heiser, this is often called, what we're talking about, the Divine Council worldview, or the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Sometimes he calls it. Yeah, okay. So if you search for Divine Council, Bible Project, or Spiritual Beings, there's a whole playlist of 7 episodes that the Bible Project does called Spiritual Beings. And Dr. Mike Heiser was a advisor on the script for each of those videos. Super short, super accessible. But there's one whole video specifically on the Divine Council. And so, yeah, I think those are going to be helpful places for most people to start.
I think that, great. So start with either of those. And I would say too, that we've touched on a little bit, but if you get into that just a little bit, and you think, wow, this is good stuff. Like, this is definitely for me. Definitely get into the Naked Bible podcast. Steve was saying that after like the 30 or 40th episode, or whenever season 2 starts or whatever, it definitely ramps up, and that's true. But there's some really practical things even early on that just help your mentality around simple biblical stuff, theological stuff that we just kind of overlook. So they're definitely good starting places there. I think too, just to kind of close up my thoughts on it, is we all are geared so differently. Like Steve's sweet grandmother, I think most of our grandmothers who just, sang hymns all day and maybe cussed at you a little bit, but sang hymns all day and didn't worry about all the, getting into the nuances of things, and just loved Jesus. And there is nothing wrong with that at all. But then other people are geared differently. Steve and I are geared a little bit alike, where we like to kind of, things seem either boring or wrong or trivial unless they're really brought to light and we can understand it. And so if you're someone who, I think in my mind too, kind of geared towards, fantastic stories and everything, this is definitely right down our alley. And it kind of gave me a jump start, like a kick in the butt, and just really helped me have a further appreciation for the Bible and how it connects so well together. And I think that this can be geared towards a lot of people. And so I definitely think that if it interests you even at all, definitely give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just kind of close out on this by saying, look, and I know Alex is as well. I think I speak for both of us in saying that we're just forever grateful for the work that
Yeah.
Dr. Heiser did. I mean, you talk about somebody
Oh,
who sacrificed a lot,
yeah.
sacrificed a lot of friendships, sacrificed a lot of time. I mean, he dedicated his life to getting to the bottom of this issue and sharing it with people. And, thankful for even in the midst of having a family and a good job and all of that, he made all this content available because he knew that he used to say, and I tell you, it's hard not to listen to his podcast and just fall in love with him over time, just because of how just some of the little mannerisms and stuff. But he talked about all the time how his material was, for the 5 people, for the 5 people in any given church who were just like, okay, I get it, but there's got to be something more going on here.
Yeah.
He never had expectations that this was going to just be some, huge thing. Honestly, his podcast, multiple millions of downloads. I mean, it went a lot further, I think, than he ever even expected to. But, at the end of the day, he was writing to the 5 people in any given church who were just like, there's got to be something more here. And they're just starving for content. And I'll say this too. This is a little bit of a controversial take, maybe. But because you wonder, you can't help but wonder, because Mike Hab, at the very least, and by the way, I happen to know that in some form, in some way, 2 things. Number 1, there are going to be some books published posthumously. I don't know how, like, all the details of that, but I do know that that's coming. Number 1, and then number 2, his podcast is also going to be continuing. The Naked Bible podcast will be continuing into the future with other guests and hosts, and just
Nice.
talk about world building. I mean, Dr. Heiser literally built a world around him of scholars who talked about other things. And I mean, I meant to mention this early on, but early drafts of The Unseen Realm, before it became that title, the title for the book that he was going to call it is The Myth That Is True. And that kind of ties into the whole story aspect part of it. It's like, it's the same realization that, Lewis and Tolkien came to, where, honestly, Christianity is the true story of the world. And so what's interesting is that with Dr. Heiser and like, he had so much that he was planning to do. At the very least, there was a 3rd novel. He wrote 2. There was a 3rd novel in the works, and I think a couple other books. He talked for a long time about writing, hopefully, like an Unseen Realm 2 that was sort of like just as much of a bomb, kind of bombshell thinking, if you will, but applied to a lot of other subjects in the Bible. And you got to think, God, why did you take a man like that before he could get this work done? And I thought about that question a lot, actually. And I'm not going to speak for God here. God can do what he wants to do when he wants to do it. He has plenty of reasons, I'm sure, that are beyond my own. But bottlenecks, I learned from working in business and everything, bottlenecks are never a good thing. And part of me wonders, even as effective as he was, part of me wonders if Dr. Heiser, being the main and sole person creating content around this, wasn't sort of a bottleneck, to this message getting out. Because I'm noticing a lot of people now, even more than before, who are taking it upon themselves to help spread this message in their local churches, on their podcasts, on their YouTube channels, on their blogs. And it's kind of like all the little Heiserites that have been created over the years are now taking what they've learned and really putting it out into their context with audiences that Dr. Heiser himself would have never been able to reach. And so do I think that was necessarily God's master plan? I don't know. I can't speak for God, but I know it's happening. And I think that it is a good that will come out of Dr. Heiser having been taken, unfortunately, what I think we would say to just be too soon. On that note, my church, I thank God for my pastor. He probably doesn't agree with half of it. I don't know. We haven't really talked about it in depth. He probably hasn't even looked into it that much more. But like, he trusts me. And my goodness, I thank him so much for that. And he's allowing me to actually teach a class on this coming up in May and June at our church for people who are interested in it. And it's like just one more opportunity to spread this content and help give other people the same aha moment and the same realization that I had. It's just incredible. And
Yeah.
I'm thankful for it. And I thank Dr. Heiser for the content that he created. And he will be missed, but the torch will be carried on. So here we are.
Excellent, Steve. I think that covers it all.
Cool. All right.
Story of the week.
Man.
Yeah, I'll go ahead first. Mine will be quick. Not really stories, just kind of interesting things, I guess. So, Boston Bruins hockey team from Boston. They just broke the record this past season for having the most wins in a season by a team and the most points. And I think that both those records go back to like the late 70s from the Canadians, I think it was, that held it.
Wow.
And they beat the win record by, I think, 3 games and the point record by, I want to say, maybe 3 points, which is about 2 games worth, depending on how you calculate the points. But so they had just a tear of a season. And so they're in the playoffs now. But I've just always been a sports fan of all New England teams. And so it's kind of exciting to see. Now, hopefully, though, they just don't lose in the playoffs, because what's the point of winning the season if you can't win the whole thing? But just kind of some fun stuff there. And then my other one is I'm actually just kind of a personal update. I've kind of tried running the last year or so, and my first half marathon is coming up in May. And tonight, actually, as soon as we're done with the podcast, I'm going to go out there on my long run tonight. I'm going to run a half marathon, not to the speed as what it will be on race day, but I'm going to do it and just kind of track how I do and kind of plan on the pacing that I'm going to do for it. So I'm pretty excited about that.
You're going to run a half marathon tonight? Isn't that 13 miles?
I'm going to run it. Yeah, 13.1. So we'll, that's going to log it into the books. It's going to take me a while tonight, but,
how long does that take?
With I am not quite to peak shape as I'd like to be. So on race day, I'm thinking that I'm going to shoot for somewhere around a 9-minute mile. So it'll be around an hour, 58 minutes, which is decent for a first time person. I would say that's good for first time. Not awesome. Tonight, it'll probably take me 2 hours and 10 minutes. I'm going to take it a little bit slower, not kill myself over it. But, so it's exciting just to kind of see a body progress with that and just kind of, try to get into good shape and try to compete as best as I can. So hopefully it goes well and I don't die out there tonight.
You're the man. Holy cow. That's crazy, Tom. Wow. All
right, Steve, turning it over to you.
Yeah, well, mine is also just more of a kind of a personal update, also in the health space. I've talked about it before. I'm definitely like, since 2015, I've been in sort of the keto carnivore world. Affectionately, we call that ketovore these days because it's basically mostly a ketovore is mostly carnivore. So mostly animal products, meat, eggs, cheese, and then mostly meat, eggs and cheese, and then occasionally some veg, just some greens, salad greens, green beans, something like that, occasionally, but mostly carnivore, and then intermittent fasting. And for me, really, it's more like OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. So I'm back into that. And every time I get back into it, I'm just like, why do I ever leave this? Right. Because it really does. And especially like, I'm only a few days in, I'm 4 days in. And just already like energy levels, mood, self-control, not feeling hungry, nowhere near as much like, that bloated feeling during the day. I'm just like feeling really good and ready all the time. Like managing your insulin and all that stuff. Like there's so much, not to mention the long-term benefits that it can have about, avoiding cancer and just heart disease, just all kinds of stuff comes from just eating real food 1 time a day. Weight loss. I mean, that's almost a trivial benefit that comes with it. Like you will lose weight when you eat this way, if you have weight to lose. If you don't have weight to lose, when you eat this way, as long as you're eating the proper amount of calories, you'll be good to go. But like, I would say it might not be an exaggeration to say that honestly, 98% of people should probably be eating this way to achieve optimal health. Like there's probably a few outliers, but most people should eat real food. That means nothing processed. And other than maybe some cheese, honestly, nothing with a barcode. nothing processed, no processed foods, no barcode foods, real food, animal products, veg, one time a day. And that's it. And that's the path to health.
And we've talked about before, even if you, even if you say, if you don't care for meat, or you just say, I just can't do the whole meat thing, cut out processed food, cut out potato chips, the sugared stuff, cookies, cut out all that processed junk food and soda. And then eat whatever you want, like eat your veggies, eat your fruits, you don't necessarily have to.
Exactly.
And just see what happens. Don't overeat. Obviously, don't sit there and eat like 10 apples, but like, if you just for a month, just don't drink any soda. I would say even don't drink diet, just because the bloating will go down too. Stay away from soda. And then stay away from the processed stuff for 1 month and just see the difference.
Here's what people don't even realize. Even diet soda, basically anything sweet on your tongue, there's a name for it, and I forget what it's called. But your body's crazy. Your body will respond to an insulin with an insulin spike, which causes you to gain weight and feel bloated, and it's bad. It's just bad. It causes you to store fat. Insulin response causes your body to store fat. That response happens even if your body detects something sweet in your mouth, at least in some people. So in other words, chewing gum, sweet chewing gum that you don't swallow can raise your insulin, and does.
It's crazy.
In a lot
it makes sense though.
nuts.
It totally makes sense that the mind would do that.
Yeah, because it's getting ready, right? It's prepared. It's all the things are working together, and it's like, oh, this guy's getting ready to down some food. Let's get the insulin going so that we can store the fat where it needs to make sure that we have enough energy. And if your body is running on glucose, then it has to do that. But the key with intermittent fasting, and especially with a low carbohydrate diet, because your body, there are no essential carbs, you don't need any carbs, is your body runs on ketones, which are naturally produced by the body. Even your brain can run on that energy. It needs a little bit of glucose. Guess what? Your body produces the glucose that your brain needs when you're running on ketosis. It's a much more efficient form of fuel. And you're not gonna die. I mean, I don't know what to think. You're gonna be fine. Listen, thousands of years ago, they did not have Twizzlers and M&Ms and pretzels and muffins to survive on all the time. There were no Entenmann's or whatever you have, tasty cakes. That didn't exist. And so you don't need that stuff to and I'm preaching to the choir, because you know what? I love a good Hungry Howie's pizza just as much as the next guy. I love it. And so I don't say anything here from a hypocritical standpoint or any of that. I understand, and I fall into these patterns. And in fact, I'm just coming off of a bad pattern of health, myself. But like, when I dropped initially from 280 to like 220 back in 2015, 2016, I've been able to maintain that closely. The highest I've ever gotten again was 249. I haven't gone past that mark. 249, and that number is enough to scare the dickens out of me. So I'm trying to, so I'm probably like 238, something like that right now. But I'm working my way back down. And I'll tell you, I just always feel great whenever I eat this way. So one meal a day, eat real food. It's the way to go.
You mentioning that, people way back when didn't have Twizzlers or Oreos. It makes me sad that there's been so many people alive into this day that don't know what it's like to taste a Little Debbie.
Right. I know. But even just the taste, it starts the food addiction. It really does. The Little Debbie, for some people, not everybody's food addicted, but a lot of people are. And that it's literally designed. Anyway, talk government conspiracies and all that. Look, the health and food industry is the biggest crock you've ever seen in your life. It's all business and marketing.
Oh,
it's all
that.
It's breakfast, everything. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That's not a nutrition message. That's a marketing message that was designed by the people at Kellogg's and Post to get you to eat your Wheaties in the morning.
Yeah, think of the cereal industry. I love cereal. Like, that's one of my weaknesses, is cereal.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And listen, this is not conspiracy theory. This is historically documented fact. I'm not making this up. It's not, it was never a health message. It's a marketing message. And all of this stuff is. Even most of the products that are labeled keto today in the grocery store, bro, it's the same thing. It's the same dang thing. You know what you should do? Eat a steak. Eat some chicken.
I don't know
eggs,
how they can
eat
even
some
put on their keto. I guess it's not like a lie, I guess, or do they add like a certain ingredient or take one away so that they can claim? I don't. It's just
M-
it's weird.
Many people, maybe even most, don't store carbohydrates from fiber. Most people don't store carbohydrates from fiber, and a large amount of people do not store carbohydrates from sugar alcohols. So they can create candies and granola bars and just whatever that are loaded up with fiber and sugar alcohols to where the total carbs might be 30, but they can call it keto because they can use the net carb number of like 5. So maybe it's 25 carbs worth of sugar alcohols and fiber. That's why they can call it keto, but it doesn't factor in what it's actually, what they use to make it, any of the seed oils that are in those things. It doesn't factor in that some people really can't tolerate that stuff. For example, lots of sugar alcohols give you digestive problems. Anyway, all kinds of problems, but that's how they can get away with the marketing. And it's like, you know what? It's hard to make money off of eat a steak and eat your spinach. But those are things that will give you optimal health is if you eat one time a day and eat real food while you're doing it. So anyway, that's my sales pitch.
Excellent sales pitch. See, I'm hooked.
You didn't even have to pay me anything. It was free. Check that out. Totally free.
Excellent. All right. Good deal, Steve. I think tonight was a long one, but it was a good one. I think it was well worth going through that. And I'm sure that Steve and I will kind of come back to the subject a little bit more and go through our own little personal stories involving obviously the Bible and the divine counsel and all that. But little taste for everyone there. And if you stuck around this long, thank you. And I guess we're interesting to some people, Steve.
100%. Yep. All right. Alex, it's been a pleasure, my friend. This was a great topic, and we'll catch everybody on the next one.
Yep. We'll see you next time.
All right.